Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as always by Tucker Hazel and as sometimes by Charlie. And we are here today for a very, very special discussion. We are here to talk about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the latest game for Machine Games. I almost said Xbox's big game of the year, but indeed that is Black Ops 6,
True.
because Microsoft is now a borderline monopoly, right? But we're not going to get into that today. We're here to get into indie in particular. So let's do it.
Yeah.
Charlie, you're the guest. You go first. What do you think, Indiana Jones?
We had to have him on. Look, he's dressed to the nines for this one.
This is very true.
Of course.
It's very
I
indie
did
coded.
This
have to
guy's
do it
dressed
to
to
him.
the
I did have to
tens,
do it to him.
frankly.
Harrison Ford never had hair like you did.
That's true.
And do, sorry. That's not past tense. In the moment, you have fantastic hair.
Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to get an update on the hair progress and make sure I don't lose it.
Well, maybe Harrison Ford will grow great hair in the future.
Well, they do
We don't
call
know.
him Harrison Ford.
Very true.
Excellent point.
So-
Excellent point.
Yeah,
What about this game?
you never know. So the way I feel about this game is actually very similar to how I feel about Indiana Jones kind of overall. It's a wonderful love letter to history and mythology and kind of the thrill of arcane mysteries that still exist in our world today. It is a globetrotting adventure that is as excited about history as it is about contemporary culture in the time in which it is set, and I think it is all the better for it rather than focusing on propping up its heroes or moralizing about the good and bad of what Indiana Jones does and just showing us what he does in fact do and being very entertaining in the process.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have mentioned any of that in my opening statement, but that's what we got the master on for this.
Here, let me go in a different direction here. Let's set something straight. I fucking knew that this game was going to be fantastic. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah,
None of us were doubting it.
No, but I'm not talking to either of you. I'm talking to some ambiguous person in the audience. Machine Games Wolfenstein games are exceptional shooters. I particularly love New Colossus, and I think people who think that New Colossus is not as good are dumb. It's just,
Charlie,
that's
are you
a-
dumb?
Cook.
Oh wait, no, he's not
Very
dumb.
good.
Okay.
Very good, very good, very good. And so I was quite excited for Indiana Jones based on my love of machine games, but also my lifelong love of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
It's no Star Wars in my life, but it has loomed large since I was a very little kid. Playing Lego Indiana Jones, which is a really foundational game for me at the same time that I was playing with the toys and getting introduced to the films. So it really is a childhood property that I think in many ways has not ever been done justice in game form.
Sure.
Lego Indiana Jones is cool. Obviously, people really like Fate of Atlantis, the point-and-click game. But this is really what we were missing. And what's most intriguing about the game to me, and it's no longer really a secret, because obviously most people have played the game by now, but it is neither the sort of Uncharted-like that people were fearful of, nor in a lot of ways what you expect machine games to make,
Sure.
which is indeed something closer to Uncharted, something more interested in the shooting, in the action. While it's in there, it's actually probably the worst part of the game. I was really taken by the different set of priorities this game has, not only from the sort of most relevant touchstones, but moreover from a lot of its just peers in open world action adventure gaming.
Yeah.
To me, this rings most true of games like Metroid Prime, and I think that's why I really loved it. It is my game of the year.
Yeah. It is. I think it's probably like in my top 3 of this year. And it's not that I wasn't expecting this game to be great, but I wasn't expecting this game through all the trailers that I'd seen and the lineage of the studio to be what it is. And you said that people were fearful of it being an Uncharted-like. No, I was excited for it to be an Uncharted-like because, and I know all of us love the Uncharted games, and I was like, and to me, ripping on Uncharted is already one of the best things you can do in the industry.
I've only played some of the first one, and I really don't like it.
Well, that first game is not very good.
That game is bad. You should skip it. I was just talking to somebody about this and got mad at me. I forget who it was, but just skip Uncharted 1.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not very fun.
But I was excited for an Indiana Jones game that was building on what Uncharted had established, a formula that I really do enjoy. But when I started playing this game, again, after watching all these trailers and seeing this stuff, I'm like, no, this is more like Prey, frankly. And I was not expecting that at all. And this game, to me, screams design. When I'm playing this game and I'm thinking about the way that the levels are laid out and the certain mechanical decisions and certain inventory decisions and enemy placement and things, I feel this game being crafted like in real time in front of me. And that feels really exciting as opposed to being, I wasn't completely sucked in. I was in this interesting middle ground where I was really appreciating what I was playing, but I also felt the hand of the creator, the team, Machine Games team on this game. And that was really exciting to me, because it pushed me to sort of think about the game on a more critical design level, and that made me appreciate it even further than if I had just been like completely immersed and not even thinking about that.
And I think that is a sensation that does, in a lot of ways, ring true to what the Indiana Jones films represent in a lot of ways, right? Where you have this kind of, I think you can remember it, and many people probably do, as this action movie where a lot of very realistic things happen until some crazy third act twist. But the reality of it is, it does have this slight that Spielbergian touch to it, the John Williams dramaticism to it, where you do feel the hand of the creator kind of lifting it beyond what you expect or what you remember it being, to kind of make it feel I don't know, magical, cartoonish, and more so than immersive or realistic or hardlined in reality or history.
Yeah,
I think the Mummy is what the Mummy is the action Indiana Jones in my view.
The Tom Cruise one.
Yes, exactly, the Tom Cruise one.
Classic.
I think one of the things I really like about Indiana Jones as a character is that Harrison Ford has this very rugged, everyman appeal. Obviously, he was a carpenter for a long time. Like I think his sort of charm and background brings a sensibility to Indiana Jones that he's really not intrinsically special. He's not some big superhero. He is just a really smart guy who's really passionate about archaeology, and he doesn't always win. In fact, he often is getting captured. There's often a lot of luck and circumstance at play in all of his adventures, and I think that the game does a really nice job of transferring that appeal onto the player. And for somebody like myself who's not very good at puzzle games, basically as a rule, I was quite happy to feel as though there's a similar everybody can be Indiana Jones sensibility about this game. Obviously, and this is mostly the fault of Video Game Donkey, the idea of X making you feel like Y has become a joke. But I think it's actually an important element of this game to note that I think it really does effectively make you feel like Indiana Jones in the ways that you're sort of diegetically getting hints and you're learning through his monologue about the world around you, and you're paying close attention to puzzles to solve them. They're never too complex that even somebody like me can get to the game without ever looking anything up. It's decisions like that I think capture this the feel of the character, and because it feels so authentic to the spirit of the films, it feels extremely successful as a game. I don't really think about the design at all, actually, Tucker, which is what an interesting difference in how we come at this. To me, this is just playing a great Indiana Jones adventure. Any notion of game design or any of this shit washes away, even though I appreciate it very acutely, and I think the arcane influence is worth talking about, particularly because the creative director of Death...
Arcane, as in Arcane Leon, as in Arcane Studios, the sister studio to Machine Games, I was thinking like Arcane as in like mystical, as in like
No.
as in like darkness in the background. I'm like, whoa, this is weird that Charlie's bringing this up. But then I remembered there's a studio called Arcane that makes games that are a lot like this one. So look, I'm learning in real time.
And they're in the credits.
Oh,
Special thanks, but they are in the credits. So obviously there's a lot of interesting design stuff to get into, but my praise and love of the game is a lot more surface level than that. I just think it really effectively makes you feel like Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And to me, that's all that was ever going to be important.
Well, I want to bring in why, even though it did make me feel like Indiana Jones, it encouraged me to think about its design and the creative decisions that Machine Games was making that I think make this a much more interesting game to discuss than it could have been otherwise, which is, it makes you feel like Indiana Jones, but to me, it doesn't make me feel like the movie character Indiana Jones, because those movies are very fast paced. They're all about the go adventure. There's very few moments where there's like downtime for the characters. But what I always appreciated about Indiana Jones was his personality. No matter what situation he's put in, it is his wit, it is his puzzle solving, it is his resolve that carries him through these adventures, these dangerous situations, these people trying to convince him of things or whatever, or you know, the puzzles or mystical situations. But what we don't see in the movies of Indiana Jones is him sitting down and plotting and trying to figure shit out, like really granularly step by step. And that's actually what this game is. I very nearly 100%ed this game. I probably got like 85-90% of all the collectibles. I did all the side quests in the first two areas. And so for me, the experience of playing The Great Circle was much more about being in the mind and personality of Indiana Jones as a person that is obsessed with history and obsessed with archaeology, as opposed to the whip-cracking adventurer that I see on screen. It was about, who is this guy in his academic sense, in his like personal sense? What does he get super nerdy over? And so as I'm playing Indiana Jones in The Great Circle, I am enjoying fine enough these action sequences and the traps and all of that. But for me, it was much more about going and finding a hidden treasure on the side that you wouldn't see that in the movies. You wouldn't see him go and collect something that was totally off path, that is not technically relevant to the core of the plot. But that was the adventure for me, is spending time with the person Indiana Jones that is about exploration, is about puzzle solving, is about thinking. And that to me, that's like in my mind the heart of Indiana Jones has always been, and I actually think this game does that better than any of the films even. That's my thesis.
I feel like we don't view the movies in the same way, but at risk of making it a conversation about the moments I really like from the original trilogy, I wanna zero in on this idea about the open world and the collection and as you're talking about this sort of wider scope of things.
Yeah.
I don't play games that way. I don't really 100% anything. In fact, I was reflecting with my friend Ben about the fact that I don't think I've ever 100%ed any game. The closest I came was Mario Wonder, but then they wanted me to collect all these little fucking standees out of an RNG box.
You don't need to do that.
I did the rest of everything in that game, so I count that. But
Same.
I think what's really effective about this game, and it's an idea, Tucker, you kept bringing up to me, was this notion that there's almost an indistinguishable quality, but moreover an indistinguishable sort of storytelling thrust between the main quest you have to embark on and the side quests you can embark on. And I think that goes back to this overarching idea that we're all sharing, that it's very easy to, no matter what dimension intrigues you the most, get lost in the sense of adventure and Indy's love of archaeology, as you put it, Tucker.
Yeah.
And I think that that's obviously where you can feel a lot of influence from Arcane. I think that's where the game obviously deviates the most from Machine Games' past titles. And so I'm curious what both of you made of that, of the breadth of the game, because I more so than anything else, more so than a shift to an emphasis on puzzles or anything, I thought that the non-linearity of the game was the biggest way in which Machine Games was not only refining but expanding their craft.
Sure.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think I'm also not a person who does any side content almost ever. I can name off the dome the like 3 games that I've 100%ed. Mario Wonder being one of them, because fuck the standees, I'm not counting that. Like that's anyways.
Very good.
But the one of the secret strengths of machine games, especially in Wolfenstein: The New Colossus, is their ability to reward you with very cool, very interesting lore tidbits that are like a newspaper or a letter or something. Things that like in BioShock, I never found them very interesting or worth reading, but something about the ways in which they reward you, where they reward you with them, and then in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, like you said, refining their craft and making that so crucially relevant to what's happening in the Great Circle. You know, in the New Colossus, it's teases for going to a certain area towards the end of the game, whereas in the Great Circle, it's in the beginning area. It's teasing what the Great Circle is and kind of the secret order that's sworn to protect it. And it just keeps going and going and going and building in this really cool way. And again, like you said, Abram, just sharpening that craft down to a fine point.
Yeah, I think this game is actually really special in its unique breadth, because this is not an open world game. These are sandbox, smaller, more crafted areas where you're not going super far. There's no need for a mount because the areas are relatively compact. I guess you kind of have a mount in the third area with the boat, but it's also not Dishonored. It's not Deathloop, which are the first things that sort of popped to my mind as I was playing it. But in both those games, which are the games that people most clearly think of when they think about Arcane's design philosophy, you are picking a mission and you're dropped into an area and your goal is to do that mission. There are a couple of smaller things that you can do on the side, but you have a goal as you're placed into an area, and the area is largely crafted for that specific purpose. But what I think is so special about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and why I would draw more in conversation Arcane Austin's Prey, is you are placed in these areas and you have anything at your fingertips. You can explore at whatever pace you want. You can stop. There's not a time pressure. There's not necessarily the looming threat of in most situations, not the looming threat of you have to get the story mission done. I found it much more satisfying to be the elusive, running all over the place Indiana Jones that was kind of ignoring the main quest because he was so passionate to just figure out what was around every corner and get to know the map in a really intimate way that is, it's unlike the pace of any other game that I've played, because it has the trappings of a BioShock or a Dishonored, but I felt the side content was so naturally integrated, and there's always something around every corner that I was in this world that I really felt like, I mean, to me, it's just like the perfect balance. Like, I love Prey, I love Dishonored, I love Deathloop, and I love open world games, but this sits in a really interesting middle ground where you're placed in these areas and you can just do things at whatever pace you want to.
There's something that I really love about Metroid Dread and the way that map is designed, in which even when you're sort of feeling lost, you never really are, because Mercury Steam is funneling you towards that next location. And there's this sort of veneer of confusion and being lost, but there's a lot working kind of beneath the surface to get you from A to B. And Tucker, what I think you're describing is, for me, a sort of a similar sensibility.
Sure.
In this game, but in a different way, because what I think this does, to return to this notion of the importance of feeling like the character, it actually ties into what you're saying, Charlie, about the ways in which we're sort of learning more about the mystery of the Great Circle. The game puts you in this place with this character who's knowledgeable, but doesn't know exactly what thread of knowledge he needs to follow. He has all of this deep cultural, historical information, and he's using that in conjunction with these clues and artifacts to get sort of ahead of Voss. But the game always presents you with these side quests that seem as though, in the eyes of Indiana Jones, in the eyes of Gina, in the eyes of the other important characters, just as pressing as the main quest. This is perhaps another route to besting Voss to get into the next, the next stone. I think of two critical examples. One for me is a quest that sends you under the Sphinx.
Yeah.
In Giza, and then another towards the end of the game, actually situated parallel to the point of no return before you beat the game, where you can speak to a character and they alert you to a dig happening a little bit outside of the village, and then you hear an explosion because they're blasting. That's not a main quest.
What the hell? I thought it was.
And that's illustrative of my point. What they're doing is they're putting in the mind of this character who sees all these leads as important and doesn't quite know what's next. Indeed, as the player, you do, because you can look into your map and it shows you here's main objective versus field work. But in the context of the narrative, in the context of the game, you are in sync with Indiana Jones and the other characters, following these different leads. It's only sort of a piece of meta information that suggests, okay, this quest is actually more important than that quest. And that's a very, very smart design, my favorite type of design, that loses you in the game world, but never literally loses you. You can still get yourself on that right path, but you have this sense that the narrative and the characters have great stakes, and there's a lot of options in front of you. The game is very good at giving you options.
And I think that's also a testament to not just the world design and the area design on display in this game, but also the writing and the pacing of a lot of those cutscenes. I mean, the ways in which it kind of directs your attention towards that explosion. Like, Tucker, you thought it was a main story. That in itself speaks to kind of this idea of just like how can we achieve this almost detective like approach to this character rather than making him this just an action hero, because that's ultimately what he is. He's a detective for a very specific kind of history and culture. And focusing in on that and making it, even with the way that the journal works, where the more you do, the more it fills out, and the more things that you see, you kind of see it being pieced together, not only through the eyes of this character, but also through the eyes of someone who's like really investigating something. And it does, again, put you in the shoes of someone who's investigating these things in a very clever way.
Yeah. Well, I think we should talk about the journal, because that is a central hub of how this game is designed. Because, Abram, I think you make an interesting point that ultimately, while the journal does feel like a very in-context thing, of course, Indiana Jones is going to have a journal with all his little photographs that he's taken and stuff. The journal is also where all of the game design elements are like centralized. You've got your upgrade tree, you've got your spending your currency, you've got the map ticks and all that stuff that don't make sense like in world for that to be in the notebook. But I think that having it all in that one place and kind of pushed away from the rest of the game allows you to kind of dip in and out of, I'm in the world of Indiana Jones, or I'm in a video game and I'm looking at the stats menu and all the upgrades I've done and all the quests I've checked off. It kind of feels optional in a way. And I think another great example of that is the fact that you don't have to have, or you choose when the in-world quest marker shows up by picking up your journal. And then, okay, I see I need to go that direction because there's the waypoint. It's kind of floating in the air. But you don't have to do that. You can just go by the signs if you want to. And the first time I did that, and I thought, oh, because I hadn't picked it up for a while in the Vatican, and I was just kind of going around, and I picked it up, and I realized that there was a waypoint that was just floating in the air. I'm like, it's a really smart decision, I think, to kind of silo all of the traditional gamified elements into the notebook where they're like, they're all like sketched out and written and stuff, but it keeps it away from the adventure that I think does, to your point, Abram, feel a lot more immersive, because you're not bombarded by quest markers, you're not bombarded by upgrade this stuff now, that kind of thing.
I think the camera kind of works in a similar way too,
absolutely.
where, Abram, you made the comparison to this and Metroid Prime, and I think the camera is one of the prime examples, no pun intended, of a similar kind of approach to not just siloing, but making the video gaming aspects feel at home and natural, while still certainly video gaming. They're appropriate in this game that is otherwise so dedicated to creating this facsimile of the world in a specific place in a specific time, and having the camera work as this, again, Metroid Prime style scan feature where you look at a puzzle and it gives you hints. You take a picture of an important site and Indy tells you something about it, some piece of potentially real world lore or history, or he'll have some quip about it, or he'll have something to say about all these different characters. I think there is so much restraint to this game in a lot of really cool ways, and I could get into the ways that Machine Games has shown restraint in the story in another part of the review, but I do think that the journal and the camera do speak to a similar mindedness and a very, very well realized vision in a way that isn't always achievable in a video game on this scale.
Yeah, I mean, Machine Games had a really interesting challenge because Indiana Jones is many things. Ubiquitous is not one of them.
No.
Massively popular is not one of them. I mean, Dial of Destiny is not a very good movie, but the quality of a film is not always a predicate for the amount of people that will be intrigued to see it.
Yeah.
Dial of Destiny was not a big movie. And we're already seeing from the Steam numbers, although colored by the fact that this game is on Game Pass, but nonetheless, Game Pass games still often perform well on Steam if they're performing well on the whole. It doesn't seem like it's a massive hit.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's too early to see, but the I think the highest concurrent player count it hit was just shy of 4,000, which is not particularly impressive for a game of this scale.
Yeah.
But I think what it speaks more so to the power of the brand Indiana Jones. And so there's an interesting challenge here where it is a deeply beloved property for people of all generations. It is it's Spielberg, it's Lucasfilm, it's Disney, it's mainstream, but it isn't, right? And so I think that Machine Games had a challenge where they had to figure out how do you make a game that is faithful to something like that is not Star Wars, but it also isn't this esoteric small license, right? And I think the way they split that difference was saying, we're going to build this very immersive, and I use immersive in the sense of getting you lost in the adventure, making you forget that you're playing an Indiana Jones game opposed to watching an Indiana Jones film, but letting you very easily at any moment have a little help. You know, they say, we're going to make this game that is about, Tucker, to your point, looking at signposts to fast travel and about finding little, clever solutions in these sandbox environments to problems as simple as, how am I going to defeat this fascist? And I love that they're all named fascist, but we'll talk about that. But then when you need it, you use the hint camera. When you need it, you open up the journal. When you have to level up, it's interesting and universe collecting the books, but then it's a very simple menu drop down from there. They split that difference beautifully, and I think that's what this IP required. Because if this was more of a Jonathan Blow Witness style game, I would have been so pissed off because I wouldn't have been smart enough to play it. And I think they recognize that there's so many different types of people who have different relationships to Indiana Jones and different relationships to this style of adventure game. And thus, the game design solutions had to accommodate for people of all different skill levels and patience levels.
Yeah. Well, I quickly want to mention the thing that you mentioned, that this is like an in-between IP. It's not the biggest thing, and it's not obviously not the smallest IP. And I think why I zeroed in on that in my mind is because, to be completely honest, other than knowing that Indiana Jones was a thing, I've never actually played that game. But before this game was announced in 2020 or 2021, I didn't know there were other Indiana Jones games. I guess I'd heard about the Atari one, but this is not an IP that is saturated with games, and the way that this game feels, frankly, like it literally is, but it's like a canon part of the series of Indiana Jones now. This is a main story. When I think about Indiana Jones characters and character moments, I will think about moments in this game. I'll think about Gina, who I think is maybe one of the more interesting love interests in the overall franchise. But
100%.
I'm glad that this is a full force thing and not just some alternate universe, some side story that doesn't really seem to connect, because it makes this game feel important in a way that not a lot of IP-driven video games get. I would say the Arkham trilogy, maybe. I would say like the Insomniac Spider-Man games are like, these are like core to what people now see these IP as, like playing as Batman, feeling like Spider-Man. These are obviously kind of jokes, but when I think about another Star Wars game or another Marvel game getting announced, I'm like, yeah, we've done all sorts of genres of these. You've got canon storylines, you got multiverse storylines, you got mobile games. Indiana Jones doesn't have that, and I do think that when I first saw this game was announced, I'm like, oh, just another IP-driven game. But I think that in retrospect, that is a mindset I shouldn't have had, because Indiana Jones isn't something that has been mined to death, where suddenly it is, you need someone like Respawn or Insomniac to find a real gem in the breadth of IP-driven games in both of those IP. But you get the definitive, this is the Marvel Spider-Man. This is the Batman Arkham Asylum or Arkham City of Indiana Jones now. And it's like not really the first try at this game, but it kind of is for like a big full production value Indiana Jones game. I think that's really exceptional.
And I think that also partially speaks to kind of the structure of the series as we've known it, is like the things that are canon to Indiana Jones are more Spielberg, Williams, Lucas, and Ford, more so than lore, more so than some storyline about, like in Star Wars, I'm sure there are guys in the cantina scene that appear in like 8 billion different video games. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like that
and
is
every time
cool.
M goes, no!
And that's cool in its own way, because I do the same thing. Like, I'm out here watching Bad Batch and Skeleton Crew. I'm doing it all. But like for Indiana Jones, it is free from that prison, because it is set in a very, very, very close to our world version of real life, set in a very specific time slot about one character, and without that character, does it work?
Yeah.
And so I think it is interesting that they were able to thread the needle with all of that in mind, because it does speak to how impressively Gordy Hobb has captured John Williams' sound and vibe without just pandering. How impressively oh my god, why am I blanking on his name?
Troy
The
Baker.
Man in the Arena. Pardon?
Are you talking about Troy Baker or talking about someone else?
Yes.
The Man in the
Baker,
Arena?
how impressively.
What does that mean?
Yeah. That was a thing that he had when he was like beefing with people about something, and it was just
Whatever, I'll look it up later.
It was a corny Twitter post. I'll explain it later. But like, but his ability to capture that without just doing an impression, down to the cinematic language of the cutscenes feeling very true, but again, not like an imitation, not like a fake.
Sure.
That I think almost lifts this game up in that way compared to, say, the Star Wars games, which again, I love a lot of the Star Wars games, even ones that people are not as hot on.
Yeah.
Because I like hearing the Star Wars bleeps and bloops.
Sure.
For Indiana Jones, it's got to be something else. There's a little something extra that needs to be done because of how specific and how narrow that window is for fitting into the series.
Yeah.
Well, Dial of Destiny obviously starts with a very, in my view, poor young Harrison Ford sort of de-aged clusterfuck for the first 40 minutes of that movie or whatever. And I think it became clear that Harrison Ford is no longer the man for that job. I think as older Indy, he's still great, but Troy Baker is so authentically Indiana Jones that while Jean was watching me play, she was actually astounded to learn that it was not Harrison Ford, a young Harrison Ford performing that. And
they got him back.
That is really, really critical.
She's like, oh, wait, they didn't get him back for that? What, was he busy?
He's got to fly his planes. He's got to break his arm. He's got to do all kinds of shit. But yeah, Troy Baker is absolutely stunning. I mean, it's a generational performance in a video game.
It really is.
Well, it is, I think, the biggest shame of the entire history of the Game Awards, which we would all admit, the last Game Awards, great show. Jeff did a great job. But it's a crying Jim Ryan shame that this game was released after the fucking cutoff. Because he would have won without a single shred of doubt. He would have won Best Performance. And this game would have been nominated for a lot of things, I think. But the real shame, and of course we'll see if he gets a nod next year. It's going to be such a busy year that I don't know. It's such a good performance. Maybe he'll even win next year. Who the hell knows? But like for 2024 games, legendary video game performances, Troy Baker as Indiana Jones is in my top 2. Top 1. I don't know. It might be the most impressive video game performance I've ever seen. And it's because he captures what we know but managed to expand on it, because he gets more dialogue in this game as Indiana Jones than Harrison Ford did over the course of 40 years of being Indiana Jones, because it's a video game. You have like 20 plus hours of dialogue and little side things and little mumbling under his breath as he's looking at an item, lines that like this performance as Indiana Jones, and to the point of it fitting very nicely into that world or into the canon. You believe this is the same character because he sounds the same, and it's hard to overestimate or underestimate how, one of the two, I don't know which one it is, how important that performance is to making it feel like a perfect continuity from Raiders to Great Circle to not Temple of Doom, that's the first one in the canon, to Last Crusade, which would technically be third or fourth.
I think about the Avengers game, the awful Avengers game.
Yeah.
And the way it sort of inhabited this really tricky spot where these are the characters but they're not.
Yeah.
It was uncanny, not even in the more traditional technology notion of Uncanny Valley, but it was just uncanny that they tried to evoke something they in aesthetics and everything. They wanted a parody that they couldn't find.
Mm-hmm.
And this finds it. Yeah. And I think that's really important. But moreover, and this goes back to your much earlier point, Charlie, about the script, I think that it's just really well written, and my principal praise of that writing is the way in which the sort of heady historical, archaeological, biblical narrative is never, in my view, out of the reach of the player. Even as you're going on these digressions, even as, there are twists and turns, I think it remains clear what is going on.
Sure.
And it's intriguing because I was playing Fate of Atlantis for the first time earlier this year, and I had no fucking idea what was happening. Now that's partially because it's a point and click game, and I don't have the muscle for those sorts of games. But also, it's just it's a more,
gym, buddy.
Yes. It's a more convoluted plot. And this isn't really. There's plenty of intrigue, but it's very clear what's going on. And I know that to some people that might sound like a low bar to clear, but I think it's actually a real testament to the strength of the script that you are engaged by this without ever getting lost when we are talking about Adamic language and we're talking about this larger politicking between the Vatican and the fascist rule in Italy. Like it's complex, but it's never convoluted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is another example where, I've hammered on the point that you made, Abram, of this being in a lot of ways, machine games kind of refining their craft after Wolfenstein 2, the Great Colossus, the new Colossus. And I think this is another example of that, where that story is very complicated. It's very complex. It addresses a lot of deep-seated beliefs, history, and cultural moments in America and American history and American truth, American fiction, the myth of America that that we're all kind of engaged in. And this does that in a very similar. This game approaches that in a very similar way it approaches its mythical aspects in a very similar, interesting way to how Wolfenstein 2 did to the story it was trying to tell about the American fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting about the plot narrative is that by the end of this game, I agree with you that it's very simple, Abram, but I almost think that is one of the weaker elements of the game, in that when I finished up the game and this final sequence was happening, they were putting all the stones into this ring, I'm like, yeah, I guess I could have told you that's probably what was going to happen from the very beginning. And there really aren't that many, I think, especially in like the second half of the game, that many like particularly interesting reveals about what the Great Circle is, or like what after the point when Gina and Indy use one of the stones to teleport and they end up in China, that moment where the Nazi boat is on the top of the mountain and they teleport and they're in the middle of an active war zone, and we learn that the stones have this ability to fold the world, to fold space and time. That, I think, unless I'm forgetting something, is kind of the last time anything like really major about like what the purpose of these were, or like the Nephilim order, or like there's not much that you learn after that point. And so I think where I will continue to praise this game quite a bit, I did find Sukhothai, the last area, both structurally and narratively to be the weakest section of the game, because there were less elements that I felt, especially as I was finishing up, like, oh, I kind of knew the mystery. Like, I kind of knew what was going on by the end. And I was waiting for there to be some last twist, some last element that reframed things before, but there really wasn't. And so I praise the game for being understandable, and I will certainly praise its writing in feeling very accurate to the tone, and especially the character writing, I think, is very strong across almost all the characters in the game. But on a plot level, I do think there's a solid chunk of steam that it loses about 2/3 of the, like, or I guess 3/4. I mean, I didn't spend nearly as much time in Sukhothai as I did the other areas, but most of the way through the game, at a certain point, I was like, I feel like there's not a lot left to mine here once I was finishing up the game.
Yeah, see, I disagree. I think one of the reasons that the plot works for me the whole way through, beyond I think this clear guiding principle we're following, is that it plays with trope very nicely, in my view. The sort of tropes of Indiana Jones, I think, are nicely reproduced across the game without feeling too heavy-handed.
Sure.
And I'm thinking about various things like the ways in which the climax obviously is very evocative of the end of Raiders, or the ways in which our tropes like Indy finding a relic or having some sort of revelation only for the Nazis to be there to spoil and steal and capture him and his knowledge. I think that they do a nice job of reproducing these tenets of Indiana Jones across the entire narrative, while also, in my view, deepening it, particularly, actually, in my opinion, in that last section, as we have these character relationships that I think come to a head in a more intriguing way than they had previously in the narrative. I'm thinking about Indy and Locust, I'm thinking about Indy and Voss, I'm thinking about Indy and Gina. Yeah, obviously, Indy's at the center of all these because it's Indiana Jones. Yeah. But I think that when you combine the strength of the repurposing of the tropes with the character relationships and the conclusions we reach with them, I was really never disappointed by the writing.
Well, I do want to be clear. I wasn't disappointed in it as I was playing it, because I didn't know that there wasn't going to be a final twist that I was excited about. So I'm like, oh, okay, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens next. But as I'm sort of thinking about in retrospect, like the way that the game kind of closes off, I think Sukhothai is the last major area, but it's not the last area of the game. The Ziggurat of Ur is the last area in the game. And let's be real. That's not a very interesting part of the game. It is like 15 minutes long.
I don't agree.
Just go down a mine shaft, you do like 3 minutes of stealth, and then you do like the world's lamest fight ending on the Noah's Ark. Like that whole last section of the game, I think, completely lost juice. And I was like, damn, there's like nothing to do here. Like conceptually it's interesting, but there's nothing to do in this area. It like mechanically it's no more complex or less complex. There's no puzzles to do in that area. You're literally just go down a mine shaft, and then there's a 10-minute cutscene, which I'm fine with, and then a lame final boss. Like I just think that is a really sour note to end the game on. Not because it was bad, but because there's so much less interesting the rest of the game.
I think from a gameplay perspective, I agree with you. And touching on the Sokotai thing first, Abram, you mentioned a lot of these Indiana Jones tropes that we see this game kind of fulfilling and twisting in interesting ways. But I think for me, one of the most interesting tropes that you see in many of the movies is completely flipped on its head with the character of Pai Lin and kind of her cohort, her family,
Yeah.
In a very, very cool and very interesting way, where she is not this person. And I think overall the game handles it very well, but she's not an archaeologist. She is not interested in handing off a relic to someone from another place. She is fiercely proud of where she's from, and I think that is a very, very unique lens on some of the other, like a lot of the other side characters that you meet throughout the series as a whole. And I think that combined with, the explosion that we get from Voss, kind of juxtaposing Indy's willingness and happiness to collaborate with these people based on their terms, not his own, versus seeing Voss destroying these historical sites with explosions just to get that one little rock is, I think, very effective in the same way that in Raiders you need certain scenes with Belloc to then reach this kind of this shadowy face-off where Belloc is telling Indy that he and Indy are not that different. I think that is a very it certainly isn't tied into the swashbuckling narrative, but I think it is still crucial in developing the story from a character standpoint, because Indy himself, though not necessarily a static character, he's not evolving in the way your typical protagonist of this kind of game or movie does.
Yeah.
And then talking about the Ziggurat of Ur, I think that section, to me at least, fills in the trope of the Indy third act, where it is this second act that often is like kind of the longest part of a lot of these movies that really drags, but it does a lot to illustrate Indy in comparison to his primary adversary, and then you have this slow thing, and then all of a sudden you reach the top of the roller coaster and it's just going down from there really fast. And I think that, well, yes, the gameplay of especially that boss fight where you're kind of just throwing hands,
Throwing hand.
Sure, that could have been better, but I think it is so well placed in both the narrative, the trope, the structure, the mythos, but also it's still a really solid gameplay section, even though it doesn't build on much. Because, I mean, honestly, Giza doesn't build on much on the first area either, aside from what it looks like. You're not unlocking new powers aside from the books that are completely optional.
Yeah. Aiden?
Yeah, I enjoy the ending a lot.
I did too.
Because I'm really interested in the character of Locus. I think because we have then this third force, and you make the argument with Pai Lin, so there's almost these four different philosophies in a lot of ways. For Locus, there's this deep historical necessity to being the steward of the stones. We have Voss's hunt for power. We have Indy's love of the history and also sort of unflappable anti-fascist ideology, which is also a very interesting part of the game and how it's presented in contrast to Wolfenstein, which is worth talking about. Then obviously you have Pai Lin's very nationalist, but not in the sort of negatively connoted way that's often used, sensibility, defending Sukhothai, which I find really amazing. And so to see these characters between Sukhothai and between the Ziggurat all reach their purpose is really exciting to me because we do see Voss harness his power, but what's very compelling about the narrative is that he is the only one not rewarded for that pursuit. And I really like that. And it speaks to this larger anti-fascist notion in the narrative. And obviously, if you've played Wolfenstein, there's really no ambiguity as to what Machine Games thinks about the world. But I think that there's actually a much subtler and stronger message in this game that I really appreciate as we see Voss not thwarted, but sort of we get this notion at the end of the game that the his pursuit is futile. I really like that. And I like a lot of the sort of offhanded dialogue throughout the game. There's a moment in the Vatican where I stole money from the fascists. And Indy says something like, "Fascists can't be trusted with currency," or something. Yeah. And you get you get like it's called pest control to SWAT, one of the fascists with a fly swatter. I think that in these broad stroke narrative decisions and these more specific gameplay decisions, there's a lot of nuance there. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of going off to another point, but I love the ending for those reasons, and I think there's these other examples throughout the game of Machine Games philosophy being presented in very clever ways.
Sure.
Did either of you play the side quest in Sokotai where you meet one of Indy's former students?
Yeah. Yeah. No. So
Abram, you should go and play that. It's really, really good.
Well, to be honest, that's another one where I didn't even really realize. No, wait, no, that's the dig one. That's the one where the explosion goes off, right?
I think so.
Yeah, you're pulled over there. Yeah. So there's a former female student of his that is working for Voss. That they end up going through this whole set of puzzles and traps and all. It's such a classic stuff together. And at the end, it's revealed that she was working for Voss and like intentionally, and then she gets her arm chopped off, and then I don't know what happens to her, or maybe I just forgot.
She disappears.
Yeah, for the sequel. Honestly, probably.
I was going to say that is because that is almost exactly what they did in Wolfenstein 1 and Wolfenstein 2 with Frau Engel, in a very cool way. But also, not just in the end is it revealed that she's working with Voss and is kind of buying into his ideologies, but this entire time, they're doing the like Uncharted thing where they're like climbing around these vines or whatever, and they're having a conversation. And almost everything that Indy says, or every point that he makes, ends with, "But he's a Nazi. Why are you working with him? Mm-hmm. He's a Nazi. Stop working for Nazis, and maybe you'll, whatever." And her response is always, "Well, our politics don't align, but I need to do this to get a means to an end." And I think it is, and I could write like a dissertation about that entire statement and moment as a broader political statement about how fascism wins and how fascism comes to take root. But I think that is maybe the best distillation of many of this game's philosophies, in the same way that the not monsters didn't do this, men did moment in Wolfenstein 2 kind of drives home what that game is trying to say. And I really, really highly recommend you go play it, Abram.
Yeah. Cool. Well, to that point, to the point we were making earlier of like indistinguishable quality in the side content, I think commitment is the kind of word that I would use. To especially the side missions, of which there are like 4 or 5 in each main area. So there adds up to be a pretty significant number over the course of the game. But in that, they are fully scripted areas with fully unique cutscenes, and occasionally, as we pointed out here, fully unique characters and many storylines and like many relationships and things. The one that I did the most of was the rescuing the boy who was like working with the doofy English professor, and like that was an interesting little side storyline. But the commitment, I think, is really key, because there was a moment that I was talking to Aaron about a couple days ago, and I think it was actually the moment that Aaron was mentioning under the Sphinx, where you and Gina, who's been your partner up to that point in the game for most of the game, and you're always going on these little adventures together, but there's this side quest where you go under the Sphinx, and there's a whole set of traps and puzzles and a unique area, and you're under the Sphinx, which is a crazy great place to set up a storyline in an Indiana Jones adventure. And that moment could have been the awesome, very memorable, unique third act adventure moment in one of the movies, and it was just an optional side thing in the game. And I'm like, that is like a big balls moment to be like, look, this is something people might not even see, but we are going to craft these unique mechanics. Because I think that was the one where there's like the scorpions and you have to like dodge the light, like use the light to like scare them off and all that stuff. I'm like, that is like it feels like an Indiana Jones like culminating action sequence, but it's something that's just an optional thing in the second area of the game. Like, yeah, good on you, Machine Games. You really did the most with this.
Yeah, that also, you're making me think, Tucker, about the active role Gina plays in the narrative, which I think is really important. I think often about Marion Ravenwood, who is such an interesting character, a fun character, but a character who becomes the victim of the plot so quickly, I think, in Raiders. That's one of my main complaints with that film. I think that, by contrast, you look at a character like Gina, and you can also probably look at Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character in Dial of Destiny, but I remember zero things about that movie, so I won't.
You could remember her, but I'm not gonna.
You look at the role Gina inhabits in the narrative, and the ways that she and Indy begin not necessarily at cross purposes, but with barbs pointed towards each other, or at least Indy has his guard up. Marion being an important part of what incites Indy on this journey from home anyway. But then to see Gina remain both mechanically and narratively significant throughout, I think is really exciting. I think it's a really strong dynamic, and I would argue that it's the strongest dynamic Indy has with the companion character in any of his core adventures.
Sure.
So I actually was I actually kind of felt a very similar way about Gina in the sense that like she is less a love interest or companion and more so an equal. She is, like you said, still a driving force in this plot, and I would compare her as much to Henry Jones Sr. As I would to Marion, and I think that she is kind of the best of both worlds. Though I don't know if I would say I like her more than his dad,
Sean
just
Connery,
because I don't know if anything tops a couple moments that Sean Connery is able to bring to screen. But like ultimately, like she brings a lot of those really really strong qualities, and I think it is cool to see them take those inspirations from her and have her be so much more of an agent of motion in this game.
Well, because there are multiple moments where she's ahead of Indy. She knows more about the situation because her sister was involved in it. She makes multiple decisions that pull Indy alongside her, which I think is like, these moments are fun because you get him sort of out of his element occasionally when Gina is the one taking charge, and it makes a lot of these climactic moments where like they're like grabbing each other because they're about to fall off a cliff or whatever. Insert moment where two characters are working together to solve a puzzle, an adventure, whatever moment. Feel a lot stronger because I feel the involvement of the two of them, not as like the Tails to Sonic, who's just kind of like hanging along for the ride, but like the two of them are on an adventure together. This is more like a way out, or It Takes Two in my mind, where it's like, this is, I mean, obviously it's not actually a co-op adventure, but Gina and Indy working together, solving puzzles together. For most of especially the main missions, Gina's alongside you for like 80% of them, something like that. And of course, she like sets up her post for when you're doing the side missions. She's not involved in all of those, but as you mentioned before, she's involved in a lot of them. So I think that she is another reason why this game works so well as an Indiana Jones narrative, because she is a very strong, distinct side character that I think also has a really they have a really nice growth over the course of the game, and their bond together and the way they learn about each other is so natural, and the way there's reveals about both of their personalities and the way they like treat each other, it grows over the course of the game, and I think that's like I think it's really important that you see that, because again, to the point of this kind of being Uncharted, that's one of the best aspects of the Uncharted games is how Nathan Drake grows and learns and works alongside other people, not as the loner adventurer, but as the with Sully and with Elena and with Sam, and like the buddy characters are the best part of Naughty Dog's games, frankly. And this kind of goes along in that vein where it's the bond between them. This is an Indiana Jones narrative at the top, but as you explore the game, it's really an Indy and Gina story, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, because when I think about Last Crusade, I'm thinking about them tied up together in the castle. I'm thinking about
Great moment.
I'm thinking about him in the tank and the sort of slapstick action sequence in there. And I love that stuff, and obviously I love what the father-son dynamic pulls out of both characters. But I think that there is something particularly unique, and I love this word you've both have been using, this idea of an equal, of a Naughty Dog style Sully. I mean, Sully's a father figure in some ways, but this idea of this equal adventurer, I think is really great, because I also think that Gina gets one of the most impactful moments when she finds her sister Laura frozen in the submarine, in what is, in my view, one of the most interesting sequences in the whole game. I love that whole part of the game. Because I what I like about her is the way in which then she becomes unmoored when her motivation for being on the quest, finding her sister, proves to be fruitless because her sister is dead. The way she has to find a new and resolute vision within herself, I really like. I like her refocusing. I like her commitment to this war journalism. I like this notion at the end of the film that she cares deeply about Indy as Indy has grown to care about her, but she has this higher calling and higher purpose, the way that Indy himself often has in his pursuits, his academic pursuits, hers for journalism and for this reporting. I think it's really effective, and I think it, like Indy's relationship with his father, I think pulls a lot out of him. And I think that's why I really like, particularly where their relationship ends in the very final minutes of the game.
Yeah. So there are a few other elements, just to sort of steer away from narrative right now. There are a few elements I think we definitely need to talk about. Number one is like stealth and combat, because that's actually what you end up doing most of this game. And the other part is just environment design and like production value. And which one do you guys feel that you want to tackle first?
Well, I have
else.
stuff. I have very strong points to make about both. I think, but like talking about combat and stealth, I think that was by far the weakest part of the game, and despite it still being most of the game, I think something that I saw a lot of people criticize that I actually really loved about it was the enemy AI.
Yeah.
It feels very true to what you kind of see on screen happening during these films, and what you kind of imagine it looking like as this like 6 foot tall, very distinctly dressed guy is doing as he's running around in front of like very, very stupid Nazis with a very bad field of view. It just felt very faithful to that in a very silly way that I really appreciate. Very cartoonish.
Yeah.
I think that we often think about elements of game design and gameplay like enemy AI as there being a unilateral rule as to AI should be this way,
or needs to improve in this way.
Yeah, and when it doesn't, then it's wrong. I don't agree. I think you're actually totally right, Charlie, and it's part of why another Lucasfilm Games release this year, Star Wars Outlaws. I was very pleased to see them remove the insta-fail stealth they have, because there is a, as you're saying,
exact opposite mindset.
Yeah, but there's an authenticity to the incapability of the enemy.
Yeah.
And the fun of the gameplay isn't the challenge. The fun of the gameplay is pointing and laughing. I think about how much I enjoyed pushing a Nazi off the side of a building to their death, or coming up behind them with a guitar, or coming up behind them with a bottle and just shattering it over their head. You can find fun gameplay fun through challenge, but you can also find fun this way by the fantasy of it. And I think that the fantasy more than makes up for the in the traditional gamey sense poor AI quote unquote.
Totally.
Where I think the game does lose its way though, and this is where I do take issue with the Ziggurat of Ur section, is when we're interested in forcing you down a corridor.
Yeah.
And there's still multiple ways to approach that corridor, but I think it's really best when the challenge isn't getting past the enemies. The enemies are just a fun thing to tool around with on the way to the next point of interest. I think that's when the combat is at its best.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that this game for me is about the adventure and it's about the exploration. The combat and the stealth happen to be the interactive method to get around the environment and what the roadblocks are, of course, the enemies and the different checkpoints that the Nazis are set up at different points in the game. And like, okay, I got to find a way around them. I think that they serve just the right amount of road bump purpose to encourage you to engage with the environment. And that's the key. Is it's not about I need to really like think about their lines of sight and how loud my footsteps are or whatever, like insert stealth mechanic here that is serious in other games, but they provide just enough an intellectual challenge for you to be like, all right, so there's a roadblock here. How am I going to get around that? Especially in the Vatican, which I think is easily the best area in the game, in my opinion. You look at a group of guys sitting there and you're like, well, I don't really want to deal with them. I could like run past them or like punch them in the head if I want to. But for me, I was much more encouraged to engage with the environment and think, all right, so there's a ladder off here in this side room. So if I go up that, I can get on this pipe and go across, or I can shimmy behind something or hide behind a box, and obviously until they like go past me. And it was the engaging with the environment, especially in the Vatican, that was my favorite part of the game. Is like, where are the little paths? Where are the little side things? Where's the thing that I can use my whip to grab and like climb up on, which gets me out of their line of sight? That I thought was great, and the enemy AI is just good enough to where it encourages you to engage with the environment, but it's just dumb enough to where you're able to balance the stealth and the combat in an interesting way. The only problem that I had with the stealth, because it's not like an incredibly granular stealth, is that sometimes the enemies stay like aggroed much longer than they should for a game that has this dumb of enemy AI. And I had this one moment where I got half the fucking Vatican Nazis mad at me, and I went into the like doctor's office area, like where you meet the guy that gives you the camera, and you can't go into a certain number of doors there because you're in combat. You can't enter these doors. But also, they can't get into that building. But they were still mad at me. And so I just sat there in the car. I put my controller down. I'm like, they'll de-aggro at some point. Because I'm like, I don't know how I'm supposed to de-aggro them. I'm in a building. They can't see me. But they're just out there like, I saw a guy. Like for like 6 minutes. It was like, okay, this is overkill. But it is balanced for most of the game. It's balanced in just enough of a way where it's fun and doofy, but not like overbearing.
Yeah,
Tucker?
Yes?
No, you go ahead.
Oh,
no, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna have Tucker change the subject because he wants to talk about the environments as well.
I do. Yeah,
My last thing, if before we change subject, is the checkpointing in this game is awful. It is downright horrendous for stealth sections, especially with how aggro some of the AI can get very, very quickly. I have in multiple points lost half an hour's worth of progress as I'm stealthing through these sections.
Jeepers.
because like even though I'm not in combat, the game did not make any kind of checkpoint or benchmark to bring me back to, and wound up with some very, very frustrating loss of time on a review deadline.
Now it is
and also had to
possible
just
that is something that was patched, because I never had any of that in my experience. So it also, maybe I'm better. Who knows? But I believe you that was an issue. But I never encountered that. So it's something that could potentially have been patched. But I don't really. I can't say for sure.
Now, Tucker, what do you want to say about the environments?
Well, what I want to say about the environments is the first thing that I messaged anyone about this game. The first thought that crossed my mind about this game is, holy God Almighty, the environment design team, the prop team on Machine Games are legends in this field. The amount of environment variety in this game, the amount of one-off little knickknacks and paintings and elements that create a incredibly believable set of environments is off the charts in this game. And they have the perfect amount of like lightly cell shaded sheen to them where it's like it's not hyper realistic, but they feel so cohesive and everything's there. And if you go into an office, it's going to have the proper candles and the nicest little, it's just, there's little touches everywhere that just like that was what immersed me in this world, is like walking to an area of the Vatican and seeing they have the proper fruit types and proper bread types in each of the areas. Like they took this a step beyond to have period accurate paintings and period accurate types of currency and like all this stuff that I'm just like walking around in the environment, like color wise and language wise and like clothing wise, for all of these areas make them feel so distinct. I just think it's an incredible achievement to have jungle area, Italy, Egypt, Thailand, a frozen boat in the Himalayas, running through war-torn China, the Ziggurat of Ur, Noah's Ark. Like, you're introducing all these places, and they're all equally as carefully thought out in the amount of complexity of environmental detail and amount of unique props that reflect the culture. It just feels so authentic, which is like a cheap buzzword to use. But as I'm walking around in Giza or Sukhothai, and they feel so atmospherically different and so reflective of different cultures from around the world, and then walking around the environment, Indy will respond like to people walking on the street. He'll respond in different languages depending on what he's wearing and what they're saying. Like if he's dressed up as a fascist, he'll respond in German. I'm like, God, they thought about this stuff. They put so much effort into making it believable. It's just it's an absolute masterwork in environmental storytelling, environmental design. I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to add on that. I think you're totally right. Machine Games just obviously knew that this is a game that's going to be combed over. You know, it is not a game that you play quickly in a moment-to-moment sense.
Yeah.
You're really observing your environment, and that both in terms of puzzle solving, but simply in terms of marveling at the beautiful locations they put you in, and they had no choice really but to render it to this degree of fidelity. And I think it's a astounding achievement. I agree completely.
And I think to further the kind of the kind of theme that we've been one of the themes that we've been touching on of confidence, there's a point to which confidence can become cocky or arrogant. And one of the few points where this game doesn't feel just, dick on the table confident is the disclaimer at the very beginning, where it says we're doing our best to depict these cultures, these places, and these peoples and languages in the times in which appropriate to the time in which this game is taking place, appropriate to the politics, the culture, the language, everything. And I really adore that. For me, Indiana Jones has had an immense impact on my life. It has made me obsessed with antiquity and travel, with culture, with language, with discovery, with the sense that you get from holding an old thing in your hand or seeing something new or discovering something for the first time, the mystery of another culture, the wonder of what might as well be a new world to most people. And I think that that to me, is especially hit close to home because of like where I was at in my life. I had just gotten back home from this like life-changing 3-month adventure. I just went somewhere other side of the world by myself, and I had just gotten back when I got this code. And I think the timing of that, for me personally, on a deeply personal level, in a way that I don't think many other people are going to relate to, this was exactly what I needed. My adventure was done, but I was still able to go see parts of the world. Whether or not they're realistic is immaterial, because they felt believable and so masterfully crafted.
Yeah. Are there any other topics you want to go over?
I don't think so.
What was your point, Abram?
I didn't have a point. I was gonna say, do we want to end it there? Because I think that's a fantastic sentiment to end it on.
Absolutely. This game is awesome.
Well, that and
oh yes, continue, Charlie.
I was gonna say the other sentiment we should end on is like maybe like pushing fascists off of buildings as well, or punching them.
That has suddenly encouraged me to hit them with a guitar or walk or insert miscellaneous item that you can grab here. God, I mean, my favorite thing about the combat was charging up a punch, Y-I-O-Ing them, and going up behind them and going, oh, bam, as they turn around and just knocking their lights out. I was a charge up that right hand as far as it'll go, motherfucker. And just I one punch man basically every guy I could get. And it ended me up in these scenarios where it was like Hitman style, like piling up just a bunch of bodies in an area as they all come at me. I'm like, hey, boom! And God, it was a great feeling. It was a great feeling.
I was whipping everybody. It's my favorite thing to do.
Combat,
Whip
really?
them so they drop their weapon because it's just fun to hear the bullwhip crack. Have them drop their weapon or hit them in the hand. And they go, ow, and then you go up and you punch them in the head.
Yeah,
Sounds so
great.
good.
It's really, really great, and it's my game of the year. Tucker, end the video.
bye-bye.